Welcome to the Reflective Leader podcast, where we hold up a mirror and explore how we live, how we lead, and who we're becoming along the way. Hosted by me, Krista Johnson. So who am I and why am I starting a podcast? For those of you who don't know me in real life, I'm an organizational psychology practitioner and certified executive coach who has been working with individuals and teams in corporate environments for almost 15 years. I currently lead organization development coaching and team effectiveness for a luxury retailer, while also offering executive coaching and team coaching experiences to leaders and organizations all around the world. I am so deeply curious about human behavior and adult development and what really helps people thrive inside of complex systems. I'm a certified Enneagram practitioner and a Fierce Conversations practitioner, so you may hear some of those frameworks or tidbits show up in how I think and how I reflect and just how I make meaning of the world around me and leadership. I am incredibly lucky to do the work I do. Working inside corporate systems gives me almost like a front row seat to so many different ways of being human and being a leader. I'm inspired every single day by the clients and the teams that I work with who are willing to, do that inner work of growth and change. And while my work is meaningful and it's a huge part of my life, it's not all of my life. I'm a queer woman living in Dallas, Texas with my partner and our sweet dog. I love hosting dinners and gatherings, exploring art and food and fashion and beauty, and really finding inspiration through travel. All of these experiences shape how I see the world, how I relate to others, and also how I show up in my work and in my life. And those experiences will also show up here. And why I wanted to start a podcast and why now. There are so many podcasts. I feel like everyone has a podcast, and I've fought it for a long time. But there's a quote that says, if it's your calling, it will keep calling. And this has been calling. So I'm a lifelong learner. I read, I reflect, and I find myself really wanting to share what resonates and almost kind of wrestle and ask bigger questions. I really want this podcast to become a place to do exactly that. Maybe a place we can slow down, we can get curious, and I want to create a safe space for reflection and explore how we live and how we lead ourselves and our teams. Because the truth is, or my truth is, I believe that humans are really complex. We are made up of so many overlapping identities and roles and experiences that really shape how we show up in the world. And we know leadership does not exist in a vacuum, and neither do we. So along the way, throughout the topics we're going to cover on this journey, I'll be sharing pieces of my own life, of course. I'm going to challenge myself to share some messy parts, maybe the questions I'm sitting with, maybe share moments that bring humor and joy, but the full gamut. So my hope is that we can laugh and have fun together, maybe not take ourselves too seriously, even as we talk about really important, meaningful things. And my hope is that this space will become a place where being human is not only welcomed, but almost celebrated. So what to expect from this podcast? Well, your guess is kind of as good as mine at this point, and I really mean that in the best possible way. I don't want this to be a show that's driven by a rigid format or driven by a publishing schedule or even driven by a need to perform. So when a topic feels alive or maybe it feels timely or worthy of conversation, I plan to turn on the camera, turn on the mic, and hopefully share what I'm noticing, maybe what I'm learning, or what I'm sitting with in that moment. I really want this podcast to just unfold organically, guided by curiosity rather than certainty or ego. And I am so grateful you're here for the ride wherever it takes us. So the topic for today, when I thought about the first topic for my very first podcast episode, I wanted to start somewhere somewhat personal. So I'm turning 40 this year in 2026, and the last decade has been full of growth and questions and moments of sadness, but also moments of really deep clarity. So today I'm sharing a handful of my leadership lessons over the last decade as reflections that I'm still living into. So let's get started. The first one is self-awareness is the foundation of leadership. So I feel if self-awareness is the foundation of leadership, then reflection is the practice that really sustains it. A reflective practice creates almost space between stimulus and response. It helps us notice as leaders our triggers, question our assumptions, and almost choose how we want to show up. Leaders who build a reflective practice don't just, react to the world around us. We are able to respond with intention. And I think I've shared this on other platforms. Well, I know I have, and podcasts even recently, but breath work has been one of the most powerful tools in my reflective practice. It brings me out of my head and back into my body. Breath work and intentional breath slows my nervous system, and it creates that internal space that's really needed to see clearly and help me respond thoughtfully rather than reflexively. So that is just one example of a reflective practice as leaders that you can put in your tool belt. I highly recommend that you find a practice that works for you, whether that's breath or meditation, going on intentional walks, moving your body with intention, whatever that is. So my second lesson number 2, is leadership requires access to all 3 centers of intelligence, or all 3 centers of expression, sometimes they're called. And this is how we think, how we feel, and how we act. So wisdom comes from knowing which center to lead from and when. So knowing, do I need to access my head? Do I need to access my heart? Or do I need to access action? When we're most effective as leaders is when we can access our thinking, our feeling, and our kind of action and instinctive intelligence and move between them and do it with intention. So we know that autopilot shows up when we over-rely on one center. Mine is action. I am an action-dominant person. So I can often over-rely or over-express my action center and ignore the signals maybe coming from my mind or coming from my body at times, and even my heart. So the work is learning to sense what a moment is asking for in the moment. And in my coaching practice, I will call that meeting the moment. So you have someone in front of you, and that conversation or that interaction may require your autopilot. As I mentioned, mine is action. But what if that situation or that interaction requires a different way of being? Maybe it requires a deep analysis, or maybe it requires accessing the heart. So being able to meet the moment in front of us with attention. Sometimes these moments will call for clarity and analysis. Sometimes they'll call for empathy and connection. Sometimes these moments will call for being grounded in action and in trusting an instinct. Great leadership, I've learned over the last decade, is not about choosing one center over the other and staying in that space, but learning how to meet the moment and integrate all 3. Knowing which one to leverage to meet the moment. I'm a big Enneagram fan, and I don't think you're probably surprised to hear that. And the assessment I use gives me insight, gives all of us insight into our default state, how we naturally access our thinking, feeling, and action, which can be really helpful as we learn to integrate these. So I'll find a way to link that assessment for you. All right, lesson number 3. We must take responsibility for our emotional wake. Stillness is leadership. I'm going to say that one more time because that's something that really took me a long time to learn. Stillness is leadership. As leaders, we're accountable for the emotional impact that we have on others, whether it's intentional or it's not intentional. Regulated people, so people who are emotionally regulated, they regulate rooms. When we are grounded, when we are calm, when we are present, it creates safety. When we're reactive or we're anxious or maybe even distracted, that spreads just as quickly. In Fierce Conversations, Susan Scott, one of my favorite books of all time, reminds us that leaders always have a choice in how they leave people. After every interaction, others walk away carrying something. And Susan Scott calls this, or she explains using this metaphor, are we leaving people in an afterglow with an aftertaste, or are we leaving them in an aftermath? I think we can all think of examples of interactions that have left us in all three of these states. That emotional residue almost, it matters. It influences trust and engagement and almost a willingness to speak up next time. Stillness and presence and regulation for me and what I believe are the difference between leaving a mark and leaving a wound. Okay. Lesson number 4. Universal likability is a trap. It's a promise that you will never take up too much space. So when we aim to be liked by everybody, we begin to almost edit ourselves. We can find ourselves maybe softening our opinions or even diluting our instincts and kind of smoothing over the edges that make us distinctive or make us uniquely us. But leadership is not about blending in. It requires presence and it requires warmth and sometimes friction. It can ask us to stand for something even when it creates discomfort, which we've lived that, most of us have. When we stop chasing that universal approval, we can gain something far more valuable, which is trust and respect and integrity. And the goal is not to be liked by everyone, right? That's not what we're trying to do, is to be universally liked by everyone. We also don't want to be so contrarian that our presence puts people on the edge of our seat. The goal really is to be clear, to be grounded, and to be honest about who we are and what we stand for. Brene Brown says, clear is kind. And that clarity is really, really important in leadership. The goal here with this lesson is also that we learn to kind of read the room, right? Read the interaction and choose how to enter the room, bringing that presence and bringing shifts that kind of shift the temperature rather than just blend into the room. That's something that I struggle with even today in my leadership journey, of knowing when to push forward, when to pull back, when to, share a contrarian idea, and maybe when to move with the herd. It's a dance. And underneath all of these layers of years of development, it's still a little girl who wants to be loved and wants to be liked and wants to be appreciated. So lesson number 4 is all about learning how to do that dance in a corporate system. All right. Lesson number 5, be mindful of whose opinions you carry. Not every voice deserves space in your inner world. We are constantly receiving feedback, opinions, and projections from other people. And some of these are offered with care and growth in mind, right? And others maybe are shaped by fear, or maybe the feedback that we're receiving is shaped by the other's insecurity, or even maybe their own unmet needs. Before we carry someone else's opinion of us, it's worth pausing to just ask a few questions. So first, what is the intention behind the feedback? Is this feedback offered in service of growth and clarity or care? Or maybe is it rooted in control or discomfort, or even limitation? I once worked with a leader who consistently, through their actions and through their feedback and their words, seemed to want me to be smaller, seemed to need me to shrink back to create comfort for them. And that experience taught me how easy it is to internalize someone else's discomfort as our own deficiency. And I learned that the issue was really not my capacity or how I was showing up, but it was their unease with it. The discernment I had to learn in that moment was not rooted in defensiveness or rejecting the feedback. It had to be rooted in wisdom. I had to go to my own personal board of directors, which are, my people in my life who I love so much, and say, do you experience me in this way? Is this feedback? Does this feel real? Does it feel rooted? Does it feel true? And of course, growth requires feedback. Feedback, when given with kindness and clarity and intention, is a gift. We want and need feedback to grow and evolve, especially as leaders. But not all feedback deserves the same weight. Learning whose voice to listen to, whose intention to trust, and whose opinion to release was a huge part of my decade-long journey that I've reflected on as a leader. And for me, it's been a huge part of becoming a grounded, self-led leader. All right, we're coming to the end of our lessons. This is the final lesson, lesson number 6. As leaders, we must define our values and really live them. The hardest journey is not up the ladder, it's inward. And that's a quote. I need to credit somebody on that. I'll try to remember who said that. But leadership does not start with a title or a team or even a strategy. And I feel that leadership starts with us. Even if you aren't leading a team yet, or even if you've been a leader for 30 years, when we are rooted in our values and clear on what we stand for, we can self-lead. We can lead others. Our leadership can become steady, even in moments of uncertainty or complexity. Values can really become our North Star. Values can guide our decisions when things are messy or unclear or uncomfortable. And I think about our corporate systems right now. I think about our macro environment, and we are living and leading inside systems that are changing quickly. There's uncertainty and complexity all around us. There's constant movement all around us. I can't get on LinkedIn these days without seeing a peer or an acquaintance or someone I respect who has said maybe they've been laid off from their job or maybe they're seeking a new opportunity. You can't turn on the news without seeing another company has filed for bankruptcy, or maybe there's, a company that's struggling and doing layoffs, as I mentioned. So this constant movement, it is swirling around us. And in moments like these, values and knowing yourself is what can help steady us. These values can help us decide what to say yes to as well as what to say no to. If you have an opportunity that enters your atmosphere or your orbit and you're not sure where to go, those values can help you make those decisions. They can also help us figure out how we want to show up when there's no clear playbook. Living our values is not a solo practice, right? This is something that we share with our communities. When we name our values out loud and we give others permission to do the same, we can encourage one another when we see those values in action, right? So if I know that one of your values is compassion and you want to be known as a leader who leads with compassion, and you've shared that with me, then when I see you leading either yourself or others with compassion, I can speak life into that. I can say, hey, I notice that you're living in alignment with your values, or thank you for being so compassionate. So when we see those values in action, we can speak life to those and we can encourage each other. We can also gently nudge each other back on track when we drift. I mentioned that we need our values in these kind of crazy times that we're living. In addition to that, we need each other. Connection is really what can make all the difference in times of uncertainty, especially in these corporate systems. I have loved sharing these with you, and it reminds me that growth does not arrive all at once. So as I'm sitting here sharing these, I'm kind of holding up my own mirror. Yes, I'm sharing these with you, but it's just reminding me how my own growth has really unfolded over time. And this growth has come from reflection, it's come from choice, and a willingness to keep showing up, even when things were messy in my personal life or messy in my professional life. My hope is that these lessons maybe spark something in you, maybe an insight or a pause, or maybe even just a question that you want to carry with you into this year as you continue your own journey. I would love to hear your lessons and learn from you. And I would love to hear your thoughts or your questions or what you'd like to explore together in future episodes. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. Until next time.